We will explore the mysterious aspects of the nursing profession, where every day they stand at the boundary between life and death. Nurses are witnesses to patients' final moments, where emotions, hopes, and fears intertwine. But sometimes, in their line of work, strange and supernatural events occur that cannot be explained by medical theory or science. These stories are not just unforgettable memories, but also things that make them ponder over what lies beyond what we can see. During late-night shifts, when the lights are dim and the air is quiet, these mysterious events can make a nurse question whether there is something beyond the physical world, where everything can change in an instant. Get ready to listen to haunting stories, things these nurses will never easily forget. When they faced unbelievable supernatural phenomena in hospital rooms, where death is not always the end. So, relax and prepare to hear chilling stories from those who have witnessed things they can never forget. Let's begin. Story number 1. The Strange Patient. I work in the obstetrics department of a large hospital, where births take place regularly every day. The third floor of the hospital, where I work, is also a place where many strange occurrences happen. But this time, I couldn't forget a patient I encountered. Her name was Carla, a 46-year-old woman who was pregnant, but there was something very different about her compared to the other patients I had cared for. From the moment I met her, I noticed something unusual. Carla looked very tired, with dark circles under her eyes as if she hadn't slept for many days. I tried to start a conversation, but she didn't respond immediately. It wasn't until I called her name for the third time that she weakly looked at me and said, "Carla." She didn't want to lie down on the bed, instead insisting on sleeping in a recliner. This made me worried, as pregnant women always need to rest properly, and lying in an improper position could affect both her and the baby. When I checked Carla's medical records, I saw that she had a history of severe depression and occasionally experienced delusional symptoms. This might explain why she looked exhausted and distant with everyone. However, I still decided to closely monitor her condition. One day, I came in to administer an intravenous injection to her. Carla was sitting still in the recliner, her eyes closed, seeming to be asleep. I gently woke her up and told her I was going to insert the 4 into her arm. Carla extended her left arm to me, but as I began the procedure, I felt an eerie cold emanating from her arm. Her hand was ice cold, as if there was no blood circulating. I was a bit worried but continued my task. However, just as I was about to insert the needle, Carla suddenly raised her head. Her eyes opened wide, blank, with no sign of awareness. She looked at me, but not directly in the eyes. Her gaze seemed to look through me, as though she was seeing something that I couldn't. "That's not your concern," Carla whispered, her voice deep and strange. I asked again, "Carla, are you okay?" But she only responded with another sentence, "She's waiting for me, down there." At this moment, I felt completely bewildered. She? Who is waiting for you? I didn't understand what Carla was saying, but the seriousness in her words filled me with a vague fear. Carla still didn't answer, her eyes fixed on an indistinct point in the room. A cold and heavy feeling enveloped the room. I couldn't explain the strange sensation, but I decided to report it to the doctor immediately. Just a few minutes later, the doctor and other nurses arrived. But when they entered the room, Carla had returned to her usual state, as if nothing had happened. She was still the same tired woman, with no signs of the strange words she had spoken. I still can't explain what happened. Could Carla have experienced a hallucination due to her mental illness, or was there something supernatural truly occurring? I can't forget her gaze, and her strange words continue to echo in my mind whenever I think back to that moment. Story 3. The Strange Patient in the Old House. In 2001, when I first started working as a home health nurse, I was assigned to care for an elderly patient who lived in an old house on the outskirts of town. She was a 70-year-old woman named Mary, who lived alone in the house she had called home her entire life. The house, though old and somewhat dilapidated, had a classic beauty that few would notice unless they looked closely. The walls were faded, and a musty smell lingered in the air, but Mary insisted on staying there, despite her health steadily declining. Mary had recently undergone hip surgery and required assistance with mobility and daily personal care. However, there was one thing I will never forget. On late nights, She would whisper to herself in the living room, as if speaking to someone. At first, I thought she might just be dazed from fatigue or medication. But every time I visited, Mary would talk about people she claimed were living in the house, though they were invisible. "They're in the kitchen," she told me one evening, her eyes distant. "Sometimes they call me, tell me to come into the kitchen, but I can't go." I felt a little uneasy, but I thought it could just be a side effect of her medication. However, the more I visited, the more I noticed something strange. Objects in the house would often be moved around with no explanation. The kitchen door would sometimes open on its own at night, even though I was certain I had closed it tightly. One night, when I went to visit her, I heard strange sounds coming from the kitchen, as if someone was cleaning up or talking. I decided to check and, as I stepped inside, I saw a shadow move past the kitchen window. But when I opened the door, there was no one there. Just an empty kitchen, with the dim light from a neon bulb casting shadows on the old dishes on the table. At that point, I began to feel genuinely worried. I went back into the living room, where Mary was sitting, and asked her if she had seen anything. She looked at me seriously, as if she knew I would ask this. "They told me they would wait for me," she whispered. "I can't go anywhere anymore." From that day on, I began to feel that the house wasn't just an old building, but a place holding untold stories, with souls quietly lingering. Every time I visited Mary, I no longer felt safe like before, but rather, a sense that something inexplicable was watching me. Story 4, Whispers from the Past. I have been a nurse for many years and have gradually become accustomed to death. I understand that death is an inevitable part of life, and sometimes it's unavoidable. Like others in the medical field, I've learned to not bring my work home with me, to avoid being overwhelmed by emotions. However, when I first started in the profession, I couldn't help but feel sympathy for some of my patients, those who had made mistakes in their lives. Over time, though, I became more numb to death. Cases of patients passing away gradually stopped affecting me as deeply. I learned to accept it as part of the job, although deep down, I sometimes still felt a strange, lingering discomfort. One night, I was assigned to care for a male patient, a 30-year-old named Jason. He had a tragic past, having struggled with alcohol and drug addiction for many years. Jason was brought into the hospital in critical condition due to an overdose. Despite the doctor's best efforts, he couldn't be revived. When I entered his care room, I didn't expect to have any particular reaction to him. I had seen many addiction cases like this, and most of them didn't survive. But as soon as I stood by Jason's bedside, I felt something unusual, an indescribable sensation, as if he was still there, even though his body was gone. The feeling grew stronger. I began to hear whispers, soft voices echoing in the air. At first, I thought I was just tired and imagining things. But then, the voice became so clear that I could no longer ignore it. The voice sounded familiar, and I suddenly realized it was like Jason's voice when he was alive. "I'm sorry. I didn't want this." Those words echoed in my mind, endlessly. I looked back at the patient, his eyes closed, but it felt as if he was staring at me, looking straight at me from somewhere beyond his body. I stepped out of the room, unable to shake the unsettling feeling in my chest. That night, I couldn't sleep, and I couldn't understand why the words of someone who had already passed could haunt me so profoundly. The next morning, when I returned to Jason's room, he had passed away. But there was one thing I couldn't forget. The sensation that he was still there, still lingering with the apologies he never got to say. Perhaps, sometimes, death isn't just an end, but the beginning of unfinished stories, words left unsaid. Story 5, The Secrets of Insurance. Something strange happened in my family last year. My mother has always been very meticulous when it comes to managing finances, especially regarding insurance. However, one day, she decided to add my brother Kevin's name to the family's life insurance policy. This surprised me because Kevin had serious health issues, ranging from diabetes to high blood pressure. This decision not only caused the family's insurance costs to skyrocket, but also created an unsettling feeling I couldn't explain. My mother, however, was very adamant about her decision. She said she had a feeling that something was going to happen, a sensation she couldn't put into words. Although I didn't believe in vague or mystical ideas, I began to notice strange changes in our daily lives. Every night, I would hear odd sounds in the house, soft footsteps and even whispers, as if someone was talking to Kevin.